What up, YouTube haunters? Brad Goodspeed here. So last time we took a typical dollar store foam skull and made it into an armature for sculpture. And today, I thought we'd detour and make muffins. Nah, I'm kidding. We're going to do sculpture today. We're going to take the armature that we put together with foam, and we're going to build on top of it, all the face details. And then there'll be one more video after that in which we talk about latex and painting. But that's for next time. For now, let's get on with the tutorial. But remember to stick around to the very end, because I want to show you guys a movie poster for a brand new film I'm going to be directing very soon. Don't worry, this isn't a Kickstarter thing. I'm not asking for money. But it is a movie that has something to do with haunters. So make sure you stick around. Alright, here it comes. Tutorial time. Here's some teeth I just baked off using the Devil's Chariot method. I have a whole collection of them somewhere, but again, after Halloween, a bunch of things got misplaced. I'm sure they'll turn up later, exactly when I don't need them. I just did a little bit of shaping on this skull using a wire brush and using my styro cutter. My favorite tool for shaping foam is a Stanley Sureform shaver, I think they're called, but I can't find one right here. So for now, I just did some basic shaping. I trimmed off the excess foam that was introduced when I used the great stuff, just to get it down into sort of closer to the shape I wanted. I was using my my favorite skull, the Lindbergh, as an example, just to look at a little bit. But eventually, that's what I'm going to make my foam skulls. I'm going to make a cast of this, and that's what I'm going to be making foam skulls to look like. It's time to think about epoxy sculpt, which again has been sitting out in my garage all winter. So you're supposed to use gloves for this part, and I won't be doing that. I'm getting the sense already that the part B of the epoxy sculpt didn't do too well sitting out here all winter. So I'm just going to use enough of this to do the teeth and the gums right now, and then I'll get another batch of it, and remember to keep it inside for next time. So equal parts of each, just guesstimated, pushing them together. And what I'm going to start doing is folding them together, folding them over, and repeating. Squeeze it together, fold them over. Before long, you'll have a uniform color. You're supposed to spend at least a couple of minutes doing this. Alright, there's some epoxy sculpt ready to go. Okay, quick tip with epoxy sculpt. Don't ever have any glassware, like don't have a glass of water around or something that are your good dishes that you use day to day, because even the residue that's left in your fingers will harden into plastic if it comes into contact with glass. That little residue will harden into a thin film of plastic, and you'll be stuck with it forever. So don't do it. Now I'm applying this kind of roughly, not being too particular with it here, to form these kind of gums, because I'm going to be sculpting detail of like lips and stuff that hang over the teeth. This is really just meant to hold the teeth. Epoxy sculpt, the thing that I love about it is that it bonds to anything. It'll stick to this foam, it'll stick to itself if you're trying to apply it over formally cured epoxy sculpt. It'll stick to plastic, it'll stick to rubber, it will stick to anything. Water does wonders with epoxy sculpt. It makes it more, it allows you to feather it into things. It makes it more workable. If it's starting to cure on you, you can kind of impede the cure a little bit by just kind of adding a little bit of water to it. You can smooth it out a bit more. Buy yourself a little bit of working time. For the teeth, I've made enough of these now to kind of get a sense of the sizes that work. Now, of course, everyone knows the longest teeth are your front top two teeth. Now these teeth will push into the foam underneath the epoxy sculpt. So you've got them anchored all the way into the foam, but the epoxy sculpt is what's going to bond them so that they don't just come loose on you later. And they'll be in there pretty tight. Again, epoxy sculpt really kind of bonds to everything. Okay, I use most of these teeth here. It's not a perfect job, but they're in there. They could maybe have been slightly bigger for this skull, but they'll do the job. And those, once we paint them and stuff, are going to end up looking pretty realistic, at least compared to a lot of props that you see. So time for the sculpture. I decided to put my eyeball, I had this little round foam thing just to give it something to sit against. I dug out the eyeball, eye socket a little bit so I could get it deep enough in there to get the pose I wanted. But the circle was too big, so I cut it in half and then started again. When putting eyes into sculpture, eye placement is very, very important. When you're doing one, it's easier to get away with making a mistake. And as I mentioned before, I tend to do one on these, but sometimes I do two. Try making it not look straightforward. That's something that's just, in so many props, just saps the character of any character. Like, you know, give it a look to the side, have it look up, look at your sculpt and figure out what direction works for you. I decided to have him looking up somewhat and intersect the eye pupil with the eyelid, and then have more of the bottom sticking out. That'll develop more as I shape around it. Right now we're just getting epoxy sculpt down onto the sculpture. All this skull work that we did previously to this point was basically just to create an armature to sculpt on top of. So what we're doing here is building up the right eye, and this is going to be my closed eye. So basically put epoxy in there, and I'm using my rubber tipped tool or rubber tipped brush to kind of create the shape of the eye that I want. But without going into too much detail on any of these parts right now, the basic idea is just to get the epoxy sculpt down. This is when it's at its most workable, right after you mix it up. So this is the best time to put it on and kind of just basically smooth it into shape. There's actually an advantage later as it starts to set up a bit more. There's an advantage to that phase, which is that it's easier to put details in and not overdo them. So now is just the time to kind of get the bulk of your material down onto the sculpture. So every once in a while I can't help but work on the detail. But basically you want to get all the big clumps down. Again, epoxy sculpt is helped quite a bit by water. And I'm just using my thumbs with and a little bit of water to smooth it down onto the surface. Feathering it into the details is quite easy at this stage. So now's the time to do it. Feathering it into the armature, the foam armature. Now, later on, when we apply latex and paper to the parts that we're not going to sculpt here, we can cover up a lot of those seams, but you still want to try and get it as smooth down to the armature as you can, especially now while the material is especially workable. I also used some epoxy sculpt quite heavily around the joint where I connected the jaw. There is foam there is the skewer inside, but if you have a solid epoxy sculpt from the top part of the skull to the jaw, and it's all connected by epoxy, sort of like, you know, around the outside of the jaw, then you're going to have a, you know, pretty strong connection. Epoxy sculpt again cures to a very, very hard form. I mean, it's basically like a rock when it's done, although much lighter. So here you see there's two ends to this brush. There's the very sharp pointy end, and then the one I'm using now, which is more sort of like the stylus of a very dull pencil, and now I've switched back to the sharper flat end. What I'm doing right here is using some water and washing the thin film of epoxy sculpt that's gathered over the eye. You want to every once in a while just do that, because if that sets up, you'll have a very sort of dull looking eye. It'll look hazy. So you just want to make sure to sort of wash that off, at least before it cures. Every once in a while I go back and do it. So I didn't record every single step of this sculpture, just simply because I didn't have enough battery power in my phone or in my camera to do it. But I recorded quite a bit of it, and I'll show you some photos of the finished sculpt at the end of the process. Now in the eye that is closed, especially towards the end, but every once in a while I go in there and just clean it up and make sure that it's progressing the way I want it to. You want to kind of shape it to look like it's closed, and you want it but you want it to be a deep seam kind of between where the eyelids meet. You want to kind of be deep in there, so every once in a while I kind of clean that out. Now here I'm just applying kind of wrinkles everywhere all over the sculpt. You can be kind of aggressive with this, especially as the epoxy sculpt starts to set up. Use kind of a light hand, but use the sharp end of your rubber tip brush and just lightly draw these lines in. And then what you can do is just add a little water to your finger and just kind of rub it smoothly over those areas, and it'll soften out a lot of the details. So you can kind of get an aggressive line in there and then soften it, and it really produces a nice effect. One of the things I've learned while working on sculpts like this is that wrinkles intersect one another. Sometimes I've had tendencies in the past to do wrinkles and have them all not cross one another, but that's not the way that wrinkles work on a face. If you look at a face, especially a very wrinkly face like your mom, if you notice, they intersect each other all the time. So I'm painting light wrinkles all over the place here, some much deeper ones. I'm creating scars in the eyebrow and the bottom eyelid. Basically, you want the look of tight, decayed flesh. As flesh starts to rot, it tightens up and becomes more taut, and it stretches all over the place. And so you just want to keep adding these lines. Now here I've added some more epoxy sculpt to the forehead and underneath the jaw. I'm applying very, very thin rolled out snakes of epoxy sculpt to create the look of like tendons or pieces of skin that have dried on. I'm sorry I haven't turned this more towards the camera here, but I couldn't sit where the camera was and I needed to see what I was doing. So here I'm trying a less natural angle to sculpt that just for your benefit, so I hope you appreciate it. So now that I have the forehead in there, I'm drawing some kind of random looking wrinkles in there. You want them to be at some different angles, not all straight across the head. And again, you see there I'm adding water with the end of my finger to soften out the work I do, so I can draw a severe line and then soften it up. Wrinkles should go pretty much everywhere you have sculpt. And you're going to, everywhere where you don't have sculpt, once again, you're going to be applying latex and paper towel or toilet paper, which we'll get into in the next episode, the painting episode of this tutorial. As you'll notice, I built up a lower and upper lip that kind of goes over the sculpt. So anyways, that's it. Here's some photos of where it is. Next episode, we'll go a little bit further with the latex and the paint, and then we're pretty much going to be done. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. Oh yeah, and here's that special movie poster that I was telling you about. Hopefully you'll all know what I'm referring to. Happy haunting!